Please rise for silent invocation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And if everybody would, during the silent invocation, keep in mind the family of the Atlantic High School kid that lost his life the other day in a scooter accident. Promising young man with bound for college in the band, and really somebody who had his act together is really going to be missed. Let's keep them and his family in mind, please.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will our clerk call the roll?
Councilmember Coleman.
Here.
Councilmember Tremont.
Here.
Councilmember Bastian.
At the dentist.
Vice Mayor Silver.
Here.
Mayor Burnett.
I am present. We have a quorum, and today is a workshop. We've got discussion items, including one we've added. Item 4, overview cost allocation of support services is up first. After that, the overview of the grants program. I wanted to, for our listeners at home, as I stall for Drew to get up onto the dais, wanted to make note that the last item is an addition to the agenda, and we're going to be talking about hurricane-related items at every meeting for the foreseeable future so that people know what's going on. So we'll be talking about the many questions we're getting about the FEMA 50% rule. So item 4, overview of the cost allocation for support services. Wayne, what have you got for us?
Our Finance Director, John McKinney, is going to introduce this item. He will also introduce number 5 when we get to it.
Well, I've heard of that guy.
Mayor, Council, how are you all this evening? Good evening. As the city manager stated, our first item this evening is the discussion of the general fund indirect cost allocation study. I will introduce Henry Thomas with Rafatelis. He's been doing rate design studies around this area for a few years. I've worked with him on several occasions, and after he's done, I will come back up here and explain our next steps. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, John. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Henry Thomas, Vice President, Rafatelis. Our firm was engaged by the city to look fairly comprehensively at a number of your enterprise rates and functions. And in addition to that, as a first step, we were asked to look at how we allocate certain support services costs from the general fund to the various other funds and enterprise funds. Now, as you know, there's a number of transfers that accrue to the benefit of the general fund in addition to indirect costs. You've got your traditional payment in lieu of taxes, payment in lieu of franchise fees, those kinds of general fund transfers that support the general fund from enterprise revenues. But this is really a look at how we allocate our administrative costs that are incurred within the city that are housed in the general fund primarily, or departments within the general fund that provide support services to the various enterprise funds. A good example of that might be human resources, where the human resource function serves the water system, the wastewater system, the solid waste. And so what we've done is gone through and reviewed how you do it currently, developed and made recommendations for new methodology, and at this point provided the city staff and John and his staff, which they've been great in supporting us through this, a computer model that will help you each budget year go through this process. And we've tried to streamline it. We've tried to make it where it's replicable and it's based on data that's available and yet reasonable, because obviously there's no perfect allocation of these costs. It's an attempt to do a reasonable allocation among the various funds. So again, we're talking about transferring indirect costs to city enterprise funds, and there's a few additional funds, CRA funds and such, that'll pick up a very small slice of these administrative costs. And what we're trying to do to the extent we can is see that these costs are based upon the cost of the services they provide. So again, we start with a general fund budget for a department and look at the cost structure within that department and try to deem how it would be properly allocated to other funds. So this methodology we'll go over briefly with you this evening. And then again, we've provided the tool we used and developed for the city staff. They have that, and we can continue to work with that. When we come back with the rates in December, they will reflect, if we have consensus to move forward with the changes, they will reflect the new allocations. And at that time, if you need to make some budget transfers to true up to the current budget, because this is, we've looked at a portion of the current budget and reallocated it, if you will. And main purpose is to ensure that the enterprise funds and their rates fully support those functions. So the departments that we looked at that we want to allocate the costs from, those that provide services to other city departments, would be mayor and council, so your function, city manager, legal services, city clerk, finance, human resources, information technology, and risk management. There's also some minor allocations for some other costs in there, building maintenance and such. Then we also determine then what departments we want to apportion these costs to. So obviously one that catches a lot of the costs is the general fund itself, but in addition we've got the CRA funds, the building department, and then the utility enterprise funds, which are water, sewer, stormwater, and sanitation. All right. I'm not being patient. What am I doing wrong, John?
Going backwards.
There you go. Hold on. Now I think I'm heading for it. It's just a little slower than I'm.
It got on the, there you go.
Okay. All right. So, in a sense, what we have to do is develop some indicators or allocators, some functions that we look at, like human resources. What's the basis of the cost, and then what's the basis of sharing that cost among the various city departments? So we looked at each of the departments that we're going to allocate the cost from. In some cases, we divided the costs up into multiple allocations where there were different types of costs within that department. And other times it was fairly clear that we could come up with one factor. So for example, in the human resources function, between the general fund and the enterprise funds, we allocated the costs based on FTEs. You know, they're basically there to support your staff, and so we use staffing levels. For information technology, we looked at the number of devices that group maintains and supports, and their software costs and things like that were allocated, but we did it among the various departments on the services they provide by looking at the number of devices, computers, etc. For finance, this was a multi-functional one. We looked at department revenues as one because they're managing the overall business. We also then broke out procurement activities, and we looked at the departmental purchase orders, and we looked at the bids and such, the dollar amounts of bids. So we again take those finance costs, split those out so that we identify procurement. You don't have a separate budgetary department for procurement, but we know what that's housed, and we break down that finance department and then allocate it based on these factors. Risk management, again, here we're dealing with various kinds of insurances and things to cover our risk. So again, we broke these down into assets and personnel related to insurances for that are personnel related. And we would note that currently risk management does include legal services as well. Mm-hmm. So, and we'll talk about that a little more. And then, for example, in some cases, like your department and the city manager's department, we came up with a composite factor. There wasn't one indicator of how we should allocate your costs or the city manager's costs, but we looked at it from the viewpoint that you're managing the overall system. So there we looked at we came up with a factor that included FTEs, revenues, and assets, because the city manager's job entails and encompasses managing all those functions and as well as yours. So we came up with this composite allocator for certain of the general costs that didn't allocate easily on a specific factor because of the function of the department. So then we went through the methods, we developed the allocators. It's all information that's available from the budget, from your statistical records. Staff worked with us very closely to help us develop the allocation factors, identify the splits within the departments. For example, within the finance department, what was procurement related, what was general finance related. So we went through that whole process with your staff and came up with these allocation factors and this methodology. Left click. All right. Last time I left click, it went backwards. I got it.
Page
So again, we predicated the analysis as on a baseline on the costs within the FY23 budget. Now, the FY23 budget to date has allocated these costs, but in a slightly different fashion than we have, and that's where some adjustment will be necessary in the future. But we've allocated the budgetary costs in a way that we can establish proper rates that fully recover costs. So the kind of information that we used were historical audits. They provided listing of personnel reports, wages and salaries, listings of assets, your operating budget itself. So they gave us a huge amount of data, and John will tell you it's a fairly complicated process with quite a bit going on. But the types of costs were allocated are typically either personnel or operating costs. We're not allocating capital costs per se with this. It's your operating expenses and your labor costs are pretty much what makes up these various departments that are being allocated to the enterprise funds. So the indirect cost allocation method would reimburse to the general fund just under $3.4 million. So of your general fund departments, we're going to allocate to the rates and users of the enterprise funds about $3.4 million. And what's not allocated remains in the general fund because you obviously need support services for the general fund as a whole.
How does that compare with what we're currently doing?
I'm going to get you, I got you a number in just a second.
All right.
And I got to apologize. Maybe give me 1 second because I'm trying to follow along on what was sent to us on our email, and it's saying 7.1 million on page 5. So let me see if I can.
Our material has a different number.
Yeah, Council, we updated that as of today. When you're looking at the $7 million, that's the total amount of expenditures we looked at.
Excuse me, sir. I need you to come up to the microphone. Thank you. The microphone's over here.
Sorry, John. That was too big of a number cap not to have
I
an
know,
explanation.
that's why I'm carrying this with me.
Yeah, all right, appreciate it. No
So
worries.
when we went through all of this part of it, as Henry was stating, we had to look at all the budgets that were applicable. So as of this afternoon, when we finalized everything, there was $7.5 million of potential allocated cost. So as we went through this, as we get down to there, 3.36 of that was, able to be allocated as indirect cost to your two CRAs, if we choose to go that way, because
Okay.
it's legitimate. Your building department, your water, sewer, solid waste, and stormwater funds. So as it is, that means that still the majority of the expenditures are still general fund because it's your biggest fund overall, but 3.368 million of it is able to be distributed to the other funds.
So the difference in the two numbers that he's looking at, it included all the costs.
All the costs,
And the
100%
the
of the
difference
cost.
stays in the general fund.
Understood.
Yep. So that's 4.2 million that stayed within the general fund.
Okay. Whenever we get a chance, we can just get the updated
You will.
stuff in there. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, no. Important stuff.
Glad to know that nobody's asleep up here. We're paying attention.
$3.6 million difference or so.
Yeah.
I'm
Get your
looking, I'm like,
attention.
wait a minute, and I'm looking at that screen and
Well,
saying,
we
that's
we
not what
decided to
mine
focus on
says.
what was actually getting allocated.
Yeah, right, I got
To
you.
the outside of the
Gotcha.
fund.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, again, okay. You're watching me, right?
Page
Just
down,
left click
the
it.
page down button, there's a keyboard there, page down can also work.
Use the arrows.
Arrow or page down.
Yeah. Yeah, if you just click it, it goes. in
Okay,
the-
he's saying right, click, you
No,
left click,
left
left
click,
click. Oh,
left click.
Sorry. All right, so the existing transfers that were coming from the general fund to the various enterprise funds in the building department were approximately $3.4 million, just under 3.5 million. So based on our methodology and the factors we developed, it is slightly lower at $3.4 million, $3,368,000. However, keep in mind, this doesn't include those other general fund transfers. Again, the payment in lieu of taxes, the payment in lieu of franchise fees. And when we come back with the rates, we'll address those approaches and what we're asking the enterprise funds to contribute there to the general fund. So under the new allocation method with these factors we developed on a line item by line item basis, the Eastport CRA would pick up about $11,800 worth of costs. The town center about $9,300 for this budget year. Building department would pick up a slight increase to $313,000 over the current $298,000. The big swing is that water and wastewater pick up 1.1 million roughly respectively, whereas solid waste goes from 694,000 down to 400,000, and stormwater goes from 526,000 down to 397. So because we took into account things like FTEs and personnel costs, and for example, in your solid waste system, you don't have a lot of employees because those are contract services. That's why those indirect cost transfers decline. Now, that doesn't mean we can't have the other kinds of transfers built in, but the indirect costs, again, on this rational basis we came up with, were really the big shift is a slight change in the overall transfer amount, but a shift from solid waste and stormwater to water and sewer with both, excuse me, both CRAs picking up a minor amount of money. So again, based on where we're at today, and we continue to work with the city to transfer this technology to your staff, we would recommend that you implement the proposed cost allocation methodology. Obviously, we're not asking you to make any decisions tonight, but just share with you our preliminary results and get your feedback. You can easily update this annually as part of the budget process. That's the intent. The current process is pretty complicated, so I hope this is going to simplify it somewhat and be a little fair. We want to review the overall method periodically as you change your budgetary and accounting process. So a lot of this is driven by the information that we have available. And as we went through it, we noted in a couple of instances where in the future you may want to break certain costs out within certain departments to make it even clearer how you can allocate them appropriately. So again, you want to keep up with your budget and accounting process. The legal services costs totaling $206,000 are currently in risk management. And what we're recommending there is you consider just, rather than putting them in risk management, that you should just house them in legal services and then subsequently allocate them directly to other departments using the new method rather than housing those costs in risk management. You have a legal services department. And what we're trying to do is reduce the number of layers of transfers that you're currently doing, and like I said, simplify it and make it more direct, and that would help. Insurance claims losses are currently allocated based on your current methodology, but they really, because of the information you would have available, you can directly assign those. And the direct costs would be charged back to the appropriate departments and directly assigned rather than just allocated. And then the building maintenance fund is currently allocated across various departments, but is mostly general fund related. We have current allocated costs of about $268,000 that you may want to consider keeping keeping all the funds in the general fund and then allocating that $268,000 to the enterprise funds. So in some cases, some of these costs were directly allocated, some of them were indirectly allocated. We're just trying to reduce the number of steps and again, continue to keep it a justifiable method. So, I mean, we already talked about the result. We can go back to that to generate some discussion. But at this point, you know, again, it was a lot of numbers, but it was fairly straightforward. And, you know, again, as I said, we look at a basis for a rational relationship. We're looking at a nexus between the costs we're talking about and how it benefits various other departments. Because, you know, as an enterprise fund, for example, the water system should contribute to HR costs. Your current methods already do that, but John felt like we could improve on it, and I think we have. And so you're seeing the results with this work today. John, if I want to go backwards, is that a right click? Or do I just read?
They switched screens on us.
Oh, okay. They're off. Okay. So, I mean, I guess one of the biggest issues is right now you're not allocating any costs, any of these indirect costs to CRA, yet those CRA funds, those functions do benefit to some degree. And while it's minor, the question is, do we want to look at those kinds of allocations to those funds? And if you recall, it was in the magnitude of less than right around $10,000, $11,000 for each of the two funds. But again, it does reflect, I believe, a more appropriate cost accounting than saying, let's not allocate any cost to it. So, you know, it's all about matching the revenues you're going to collect with the costs, and that's why we go through this exercise.
And I'm also worried, I mean, both those funds have a little bit or a lot of debt as well. And although operations and debt are two different things, the last thing I want to do is go backwards in those funds, you know, with those allocations in relationship to the debt that's already there. So to me, it's this is a conversation between rough versus smooth accounting.
Sure it is.
Yeah, without a doubt, and you know, and that's where people have to make sure that we're doing the right things so that this is in the interest of the public trust.
Right.
One quick question. I mean, we've got a lot of standards that obviously we're following. You know, as far as applications, how much this, how much that goes there. How much benchmarking was involved in deriving those standards?
So when you say benchmarking, we didn't go out and investigate how everybody else is doing it, but we have done a number of them. So we use the standards that we've developed over time that have been accepted by other local governments. Now, I will say this, the range of methods for indirect cost transfer is pretty broad, including some that I would say aren't really rational at all. In other words, it's done based on, hey, we need some more money to balance the budget. Let's take it out of this fund because this fund is healthy. So there's some communities don't have, if you ask them to show you their allocation model and their method, they couldn't produce that document.
Yeah.
So again, when you talk about benchmarking, the benchmark that I really relied on is, you know, doing this for the last 40 years and doing a number of these studies. So, you know, we could, there's several firms that do it. I reviewed a report that was done for a utility in East Florida, for example, and the entire allocation was FTEs. So all these costs were just done on FTEs. So again, part of the art of this is to drill down into the costs a little more and see if it's appropriate to allocate it the way we are or come up with a better method. So an example of that is in finance. Okay, John, when we looked at the finance line items, the costs are in a format where, you know, you've got personnel, materials and supplies and all that. Well, underlying that, it's also the fact that you've got general finance functions and then you've got procurement functions. And we felt like it was better to allocate those two functions differently. So behind your finance budget, John gave us the breakdown of those costs so that we could refine the allocation. So
If I'm laughing, it's because you just anticipated my procurement question. But that's okay. So that goes back to the silly question of course, all this falls in GASB standards and guidelines
Yes.
as an acceptable practice.
Yes.
So we're covered by that as well.
yeah, and again, there's some room for individual methodologies within those standards, but the overall cost accounting is definitely based on GASB standards and the fact that these are operating costs. So for example, when we look at your bond and your debt and your coverage requirements, okay, you always look at net revenues, which is gross revenues less operating expenses. These costs we're talking about are operating expenses by definition, by GASB. So they're appropriately recovered, and they reduce the amount of revenue available for debt service from each of those enterprise funds, for example. So what we've done is by shifting it, the coverage calculations, and you don't have any, but let's say you had sanitation debt, it would change those markers a little bit. But GASB does treat indirect costs as operating expenses very clearly, and so do your bond resolutions.
So this is how.
So we're trying to be consistent.
Gotcha. So this is how the P&L side of it impacts the balance sheet side of the business, so that we're all in check.
Yeah, and so in the next step, when we go to design the rates, we'll use these allocations to say, well, what should water and wastewater rates be collecting?
And then that makes sure that we're consistent for the next 50 years,
Well,
or however long.
yeah, and it should adapt a little bit over time, but now you've got a method. I mean, you had a method before, don't get me wrong. You weren't doing it arbitrarily. But the method, again, I think this is a little more straightforward, and it's going to be easier to maintain. The data is readily available. So the idea was to make something that every budget cycle, John and Linda can replicate this and say, this is consistent with how we did it last year. And the problem with doing it arbitrarily is the communities that do that, sometimes it's inconsistent from year to year. Oh, we're going to take it out of the sanitation fund this year because they're having a good year. And that, while that works overall, it's not the best cost accounting, right?
We have a neighboring city that loves doing that, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Let me go up and down the dais here. Chase, you have anything?
Good for now.
Reed?
I'm all right for now.
Scott, you jumped in. Do you have anything else?
No, I like assigning costs really kind of where they need to be, especially, you know, when we're during budget season, which is all 12 months, just about, right? It helps us to be able to see where money is actually being used, where it's going to and why. And like you pointed out, and I'm probably paraphrasing, everything's got a cost, you know, so to have a CRA that just shows zero, we know that's not truly the case. There's a cost to everything we do and everything we have. So I like that. I also think it probably helps with transparency as well for us to be able to do that. So
right, if someone wants to know why these costs are there,
Right.
you can give them the printouts and they can go through it and see it's step by step, line by line.
right, that's
the
kind of
process.
I like that.
Okay. Drew?
Yeah, I like what he said with the, you mentioned consistency. So it would be a consistent thing rather than, you know, from solid waste this year and over here and moving it all around. It would just be transparent and consistent. So that sounds very reasonable.
Right, and in the end, we also want the water system to support the water the water revenues to support the water system, and the water customers to pay those, and the sewer system to support itself. So this helps further refine that, because now we're saying what's their share of the general cost that they should pick up.
Okay. Perfect. What else we got?
Yes, so I just want to add, on the presentation that was sent out last week as part of the package, it also included vehicle maintenance and the entire building maintenance fund. So after speaking with Henry and Sean, Linda and I, it was more appropriate in the other methodologies that we currently had versus that being an indirect cost, because we could directly charge it. So that's the big difference. And then plus, we actually have the one slide which showed the current versus proposed. So that was the other thing. The other thing that we talked about, like, just talk about legal. We had it split between general fund and risk management, but all we're doing is taking it from general fund, putting the risk management, but then we're doing a journal entry, putting it right back into the general fund. So this goes back to what we talked about when your auditor proposed or presented the 2021 ACFR, and as we went through the budget process, talking about looking at the budget, how we're doing it currently, and making sure it's all put into where it goes. Not only theoretically, but legitimately.
Gotcha.
So all Henry and Sean has helped Linda and I is to make sure that as we go forward in future years' budgets, everything is put where it belongs. And I appreciate Henry coming in and not only giving us that second set of eyes of what we proposed, but validating what we've been sharing through the city manager, and I've been sharing to y'all through all the budget workshops that we had so far this year. So as Henry stated, I think between Linda, Sean, and I, we've pretty much hit everything. We've gone every single line item. We think it's legitimate. What he's provided to us is something that, as he stated, we're able to go in and update as we're going through the budget process every year. But more importantly, as I've said always, budget is fluid. So as things change within, whether it's the city manager's budget, the finance budget, the HR budget, legal's budget, we're able to go in there and quickly establish what that new rate should be. And thank you, Water Sewer Utility Systems, for helping the general fund out. But they're not helping us out, but just giving us money. It's legitimate cost. So with that, I thank HR, IT, everyone. I mean, we even looked at IT in that, they have a help desk ticket system. Well, the help desk ticket system is great if everything goes through that, but a phone call or an email isn't always logged, so that wasn't a very good thing. However, the IT department did say, well, going forward, we need to make sure even if, John calls IT, they put a help ticket in so that, not only do they know that John and finance asked for something, but they also can go in and say, well, we started the ticket at 12:01, we wrapped it up at 12:15. We know that this was 15 minutes, so they can get down to that granular level of just how much assistance is being put in by a fund and department.
And just to add, I think a real important thing that John pointed out is where you can directly assign it, you should. Rather than allocate a cost, if you can directly assign it, where it belongs, then just directly assign it. And that's what we've done. We're going to do more of that in the future.
Mm-hmm.
What else you got for us on this item?
None, sir.
Okay. Well, I know that we'll be getting into the nitty-gritty on this shortly, so appreciate it. I'm just wondering what you and Linda have to do next year once you get this in.
Throw a hurricane at us next year.
No, hey.
By
That's
the way,
what you did this year.
no, we don't use that word here. You use the H word, okay? We don't say hurricane. We say the H word.
Okay.
Yeah, bad word in this town.
Not a good season.
No.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Bye.
Thank you, Henry. Item 5, overview of the grants program. Wayne, who do we have on this one?
John McKinney, Finance Director.
John?
Mayor, Council again.
This is
How are y'all doing today?
I was looking ahead, John, for the slide. I don't see the one where it says, you found about 10 or 15 million in grants that you're going to present tonight. But I don't want to take your thunder. Go ahead, tell us all about it.
Yeah, I'm okay if I talk all day, So I just wanted to give a brief overview of our grant process. As was stated, previously at the last council meeting, we have had we've had a grant contractor assisting us with grants over the past year since we haven't had a full-time grant person in the city now since June of 21. It's worked out very well for us here in finance. and through the departments having Teresa Brooks done, handling our grants for us. I just want to go through this real quickly. She and I put this together. Teresa is in the audience back there. She's a wonder to work with. And in fact, I know Teresa Brooks and I know Teresa Brooks. So I have to be careful when I, send a message that I get the right Teresa Brooks. And this evening I didn't, by the way. She responded to me and said, wrong Teresa. So it does happen. So tonight I just want to go over real quickly why grants, advantages of grants, which I'm not even going to relay that because it's in there. Y'all all know why we do grants and advantages. But for the public out there, if they know why we work so hard in the departments to go after grants, it's there. I want to go through some approved grants, submitted grants, in progress grants, status of required reports, reimbursement requests, and accomplishments and tasks. So as we go through this, your fire chief last council meeting last week talked about the new firefighter cancer decontamination equipment grant. That is something, our grant person saw out there on, some grant feeds, and from start to finish, from the day she contacted your chief and I to the day we got the award letter was 60 days. So that just goes to be, how fast, some of these grants do move. She's also working with your police chief on a JAG grant for radar and speed measurement program. So these are just simple grants that she's seen. She's gone out there and worked with the departments. And there's probably not a week that goes by that, she's also not, throwing other grants out, to Parks and Rec, water, sewer, stormwater, we've even looked at, could we get a new fire engine off of the grant, or not a disadvantaged, city. So, but those are just some of the things that she goes after. But she's looking at, grants, for helping with North Boat Ramp and floating docks, derelict vessels, playground equipment, assistance to firefighter grants, firehouse sub grants. Your local restaurant right here, they give grants out to your community, fire and police every year. So that's an easy grant just to fill out. Whether it's getting gloves for firefighters or raincoats for police officers. I mean, you can use that for all sorts of use because it's safety gear.
The
If it's
one we approved
reflective.
last week
Yep.
for removing carcinogens from firefighting equipment.
Absolutely. So Safe America's Treasure grants, our FERDAP grants, for whether we're building a new facility or trying to improve a facility in our parks program, body worn policy, DOT safety highway grants. So these are just a little snippet of things that she looks at, and she'll send an email to whoever the department that grant might apply to, and me just say, are you interested in doing this? And if she gets a yes, then she goes full steam ahead putting together the application for us. Depending on whether or not it has a match, whether it has recurring cost, per our policy dictates whether or not it's done at the city manager level or if it comes to council for approval before we submit a grant. Obviously, if we get a grant award, it always comes to council for approval. So in the quarter since she's transitioned, so May of this year, she transitioned to where she's handling not only some of our grant tasks, but actually going after the new grants. That just occurred May of this year. Prior to that, she was just helping us do odds and ends related to grants. But she is the point person for the city to prepare and submit quarterly reports. She's on task for FDM. She's on task for SRF. She's out there assisting us through every one of our grant awarding agencies to make sure we're in compliance. When we flip that switch on May 1st, I'm sitting down in the Keys on the phone with her, and her and I go through and we do the get the grant reimbursement for CDBG that we hadn't done for some time, and got us from potentially an issue with HUD to we're in full compliance. So she is doing everything for us to make sure that we are on top of the game for everything that we're.
$400,000 grant. You want to get that one right.
Absolutely, and if it wasn't for Miss Brooks, where we had that 2020 grant in limbo, thanks to her, everything, and we got that money given back to us and reallocated by HUD to the city. So she's, on task. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not assistance from the Lynn's, the Cynthias, the Lindas. She doesn't do this all on her own. She works with us. It's an open line of communication. I don't know if, when you walked in here, she was in the back talking to the police chief, giving a status of where things are. So she is that transparent, and the open communication line works for us. As a contractor, you would never know she's a contractor. She has a city email address. Anyone that might be looking to get her, she can get in touch with her one way or another, whether it's her city email address, her business address, or her phone. This past year, she helped us to get the 5-year CDBG consolidated plan put together. She, as early as this week, was helping to get all that updated with HUD. That was accepted yesterday. So she worked with that. Now that she's got that plan, now she's going to be coming back to council so that we can get the 19 amendment done, the 20 amendment done, and start. I should have updated this because this was sent on Friday. But as of Friday, we were still working on it, but it's finalized. The 22 CDBG action plan is done. She's made sure that all the FCT, ECHO, and CDBG quarterly and annual reports are done. We no longer have red flags in these agencies. They're all green flags. So all of our past issues that we had when I walked into the department back in February have all been resolved. So again, it's making sure she's guiding us to make sure we're on the right path. Without question, if there's an ECHO advisory board or a county council that something regarding one of our grants is there, she's there. You might not know she's there, but she's there, and she's sending me messages left and right. I got this question going on that's been asked. What's the answer? We can sit there and live, stream, not live stream, but live, go back and forth with her on an answer. So she is working on our behalf, no matter where she is in this county or in the region on one of our grants. With
I
that,
see the chief smiling back there because he's looking for money for license tag readers.
yeah. So
Kinda.
so I can tell you this has been a very beneficial relationship with us. When you have an in-house person working on grants, it's great, but sometimes they only know this. This is an individual that's out there that she's connected with, all the agencies that give the big dollar grants, the FERD out to ECHO, the FIND, SRF. She's out there for us working on our behalf. So, with that, I hope this is, a long-standing relationship. Right now, we have it on a 1-year plan. So, that 1 year started October 1st. And, hopefully it works wonders for us moving forward, and I look forward to continuing to work with her.
So that's your recommendation.
As a finance director, yes, sir.
Because I'm going to tell you, it's really about the right person. I mean, in the past, I've preferred to have it in-house, but I've seen people in-house, just particularly one we had somewhere in the past, it just warmed a seat. And while I particularly prefer to have it in-house, we've also sorted it out a few years ago to another agency, and we got a similar result. But I've seen, I think it's all about you getting the right person more than it is whether we decide whether we want to keep it in-house or sub it out. And if you've got the right person subbing it out, I think that is the common denominator that we're looking for.
So I will tell you this, Mayor. Saturday morning, 7:30, she's called me. I've sent her an email. She answers it. So, if there's something going on, whether it's after hours or on the weekend, and it's pertinent to us getting something done, there's no hesitation. So again, it has worked great for us.
Okay. Council, questions or comments?
Not for me.
Sure.
Anyone? Okay.
I just wanted one closing. There's a little bit of a push on the person. The point for me was that we've had struggles with our CDBG. We even had a Sunday meeting one time. A lot of the grants that we get are recurring funding. And if you're going to go to an organization over and over again, you better stay in touch with them. You got to be in compliance with them. You got to have a good reputation as an organization that follows the rules, that spends the money that they get. Same thing that Tim's staff does with the MPO money that we have for transportation funding. So the most important thing for me was to make sure that we complied with all the grants that we had and that we diversify the opportunities that were out there. So you saw a couple on there that weren't traditional for Port Orange in the past that have been added to it. You see that we are no longer having any timeliness issues or any responsiveness issues with these organizations. So I wanted our reputation to be solid and strong as a community. You can count on if we get a grant from you, you will see the result that we got the grant from. So that was the key to this, was to let you know that. And then also going forward, if you see other opportunities, everybody can use help. So if there's a grant you see that we don't see, let us know. We wanted to make sure we're heading in the right direction of the type of grants you're looking for. If you're aware of anything, we're all trying to contribute to the success of this and making sure that as much as we can leverage money from multiple sources, the best we can do for the community, we're happy to do that. So we just want to make sure you were updated on that change and direction here, and that I think we're in a much more strong position with our grants than we were a year ago.
Got a feeling we'll be looking for some, whether it be from St. John's or other places when it comes to water management.
John,
Which probably segues into the next item, but that's okay.
John, Florida Inland Navigational District fined. We had a couple of informal meets with them, if you will, and conversations. And I know Wayne and I've already talked about this, but for the benefit of the rest of the council, they seem to, paraphrase for you, I guess, but they seem to suggest that there is just a lot of money that people aren't asking for that are available for grants. And the one thing that I want to make sure we're looking at is anything that FIND has that fits into our wheelhouse with the east side of our city. We've got a lot of different developments. We've got our Riverwalk Park. There's a lot of interest coming on board, especially anything connected to the waterway. We are in serious need of some dredging projects, and as I understand it, if we can create the nexus of the dredging to the ICW, it will qualify for a lot of the grants and the funding they have there, as well as perhaps access for day dockage up to the Riverwalk Park area, and things like that. So I want to make sure that I didn't see FIND listed on here, but I know you mentioned it, and I really want to make sure that we're really looking into all of those possibilities, whether we've talked about them before or thought about them. I want to know every single thing that is on the table for us with FIND, specifically because we have got a person very near and dear to East Volusia County now on the board. Mm-hmm. And so he advocates for East Volusia County. He's a fighter. He won't be on the board forever, but while he's there and he's willing to go after that, we need to be doing that. And if we need to get Buddy down here and meet with him and go down and look at our areas, if I can be of any assistance with that, or any of the elected officials or Wayne or whatever, I want to make sure that doesn't go, as a side thought. I want to make sure we aggressively and proactively take advantage of that and do whatever we can with that. The other comment I just wanted to make is that back in my other wearing of hats for the city days, I wrote a couple of FDOT grants. And one of the things that I learned in doing some of those and writing those grants for the police department was that when I took the initiative to go to Tallahassee to actually talk to some of the FDOT grant coordinators and managers up there, and it was a very consistent thing. They're like, we never see people actually in uniform from the police departments ever come up here. We think it's great. And it just created a relationship, and it benefited a lot. I bring that to your attention because we annually go to Tallahassee for Volusia Days and Port Orange Days, and we try to look and see what's available, and where they're usually going up there for flood mitigation projects and things like that. But while we're up there, and when we do go up there, it is something maybe we need to look at to put on our agenda of, hey, let's try to make sure somebody gets over to the FDOT building. I think it's on the south side of the Capitol anyhow, and just go in and say hi and meet those folks and maintain those relationships and have those contacts, because I have seen that personally be very beneficial for us as a city. So just keep that in mind, that we're willing to do that as elected officials as well. So if that's some help, because there's only so much money to go in the pot. And sometimes it's just an agency name that sticks out, a city name that sticks out, a relationship or whatever that creates that little bit of a, edge that puts us over the top and gets us an award or something like that for a grant. So for whatever that's worth, just know that we're willing to help for sure.
I work with the city manager, and the people are in the back of the room will take that
Perfect.
advice.
Excellent.
Thank you.
What else? Anybody else on this one? Moving on to item 6, city manager update, FEMA 50% rule.
Tim Berman, your Community Development Director, is going to update you on this. We talked about it at the meeting last week, and since that time, they've been out more in the public, and I think more and more people are starting to realize this. I forwarded to you guys an article from Venice paper that explained it's starting to be something people are aware of, and as Tim's been out there, we expect you to hear more and more from the public, so I wanted him to go over a little bit more of what he's found out since he started putting the letters out and started to do the inspections for you.
All right, Tim Berman, Community Development. Yeah, as we indicated last week, we had roughly 700 letters that went out to properties that were located within the city's flood zone and also had observed damage during the storm for our windshield assessment. Basically, those letters are basically requesting us to be able to come into those homes or structures to evaluate to see if the floodwater or the damage from the wind basically did enough damage to classify those in terms of the repair with 50% or greater of the value of the structure. About half of the 700 are found within 3 mobile home communities, Colony of the Wood, Treasure Island, and Maplewood Estates then. The rest are single families spread mainly throughout the Sugar Forest, along Halifax Drive, Brittany Avenue in Cambridge, and the Springwood Square over off of Nova Road is where the cluster of single family is located. As we indicated, basically last Tuesday night, we anticipated basically starting to get those inspection requests to come in. We started getting those in Wednesday. As of today, basically 5 days, we've had to receive 34 inspection requests. That's about 6 to 7 inspections a day. We've got 1 crew doing those. And of the requests, we've had 31 have been mobile homes. Of the 31, 13 have been determined to be substantially damaged then. That means that those property owners have 2 options. The first is to raise the home, basically to be, so it's 1 foot, the finished floor is 1 foot above, or basically the horizontal beam of the mobile home is 1 foot above flood elevation, or they can basically get a surveyor to come in and basically survey the property to determine if the home is actually sitting 1 foot above floor elevation at that beam then. They bring that information to us, we can basically modify the request, or modify the adjustment. The third option is, unfortunately, if those 2 cannot be met, would basically be the mobile home would need to be replaced with a structure at the current flood elevation requirements then. On the single family homes, we've only done 3 so far. 2 have been in Sugar Forest, the other one I believe was in Willow Run. Those have turned out to be less than 50%. So those homeowners have been told you can basically move forward with doing your improvements to get your home restored then. We're hoping that those 3 of the single family is kind of a good idea of what we could expect, because we did see some significant flooding in Sugar Forest, and we're hoping those 2 that we did there kind of give us what we anticipate to see of the rest of the single family homes moving forward. We have 21 inspections scheduled now for Thursday, Friday, and Monday, and every day we come back in, we're getting more and more calls then as the word gets out then. So we'll continue to see that pick up then. We're trying to get more crews trained and kind of going out there. It's one thing to do the inspection, but also it's kind of how you communicate to people.
Yeah.
We're finding out basically that what we have is that we talk to people and tell them what goes on, and they talk to their neighbor, and it's a phone tag game. And then before you know it, we're basically condemning houses and kicking people out there, which is not the case then. It's kind of the phone tag game. So we're trying to eliminate that on there as much as possible, how we communicate and how we kind of direct the information. So we're continuing to learn on that then and work toward that. We have requested additional help from the state then in terms of additional floodplain administrators and inspectors to come in to hopefully get this done a lot quicker. In terms of the city, we hope to get word on that potentially next week, so we can have more people doing the inspections to get this completed sooner then. So that's kind of the update where we are right now. And we'll continue to kind of update that in the weekly report then as to the numbers that we're getting and kind of the results that we're seeing on the field as we get more and more single family homes on there then.
Tim, 700 letters. That's a lot of inspections. What's your capacity?
That is why we basically have requested additional help from the state to do those. Right now we've got basically 2. We got 2 individuals going out there to do the initial ones. We wanted to get them out there, get used to the system, and then we're slowly bringing on our inspectors and additional staff to basically allow for to do more, to create up to 4 teams then. That's why we really needed additional help from the state then to get this accomplished within the timeframes then. Because not only is
Just
it going
thinking,
out,
not just the inspections, the phone calls you get for them, the admin side of it has got to be.
the scheduling, the phone calls, basically, when you get, when you're trying to schedule the appointment, you've got to listen to the person talk. You got to basically, they've gone through a lot then, so you just can't
Sure.
say schedule it there. So there's a lot there. There's a lot that goes into in terms of the inspection, coming back home, coming back to the office, doing the valuation, doing the calculations, putting that letter together, and then reaching back out to that individual to not only tell them what the news is, but also make sure they know all the options. Because the idea is basically to make sure that they're well informed there, because we want them to be back in that home, and we want to make sure that they have all the options, and basically to hopefully to get back in there then. So there's a lot of time involved in that. That's why we're seeking additional help as much as we can, because we've also got the kind of day-to-day activities of people that were not impacted by the storm, that are still submitting building permits and development projects then.
When there is so much going on and we're trying to process so much, that there's just one word that we got to remind ourselves constantly, and that's empathy. We got to show empathy with all this, because you're dealing with a lot of people of varying backgrounds and varying age groups and the like. And none of that matters because their world has just been smattered.
I preach that every time the guys go out there. Guys and girls, basically, compassion. It's got to be, key there. But we've also, got to follow the rules
Good.
that we have there. But it's got to be compassion when you're talking to these people.
Good.
Tim, it seems like what do you refer to it as, the windshield?
Basically, the damage assessment after the storm, the windshield assessment.
So that's kind of an eyeball test from the street.
Yeah, just driving the trucks around the city, every street, looking at it, basically evaluate the homes there.
So is it possible that maybe who is doing that, or how we're looking at that, is maybe we've overshot that a little bit, and maybe we sent out way more letters than we needed to send?
We are hoping that's the case then, because
Okay.
if we go out there to that home that was identified as minor, and we go in there, it's like, okay, it's only $10,000 for the damage, we move on then. That's what we're hoping, that those inspections whittle that number to a very low amount then.
So once I guess what I'm getting at is to sort of try to help the processing and the time frame, because people can't move forward without their permit, and they can't go get their permit until they get this part done, right?
Right.
So I guess what I'm getting at is we're riding up and down the road and we're looking at it, because I saw one of the letters and heard from one of the residents today, and her thing was, I got a letter, but neither one of my next door neighbors got one. So I'm assuming we saw something from the street in her house and said, we think that's over 50%, but we don't think those two are, right? I'm guessing that's how it works.
That's the case. Or the other option too is when you look at the flood zone map, there are basically, when you look at that flood zone map, there could be properties on one side of the street that are in the flood zone.
Yeah.
Your next door neighbor could not
Sure.
be in the flood zone. And that's basically the difference in the letter, where if you're in the flood zone, you've got to follow these requirements. I'm outside the flood zone, I can repair mine with a building permit. So we have some of that. The other thing too is, the letters were sent over a 3-day period just due to the volume at the post office. So it could be basically just the delivery of the letter too, possibly.
Yeah.
But if we've got that address, I can definitely take a look at that and evaluate that then if you want to talk offline. on
Yeah,
that.
we can do that. But so I guess I'm just trying to grasp the thing, because you mentioned we've already done 3 single-family residences, and those were fine. I guess what I'm getting at is, so let's say we do 15 or 20, and then we realize, okay, now that we're doing the more in-depth inspection, what we were seeing from the windshield or the the eyeball test from the street, maybe that really, our perspective was too high, I guess is what I'm saying. Is there a way then to say, okay, well, let's go back and fast track a bunch of these and do that, or it's now that we've sent the letters out, they have to go through the inspection process?
We've indicated those into the software system, basically Volusia County, so they're documented as basically minor or major.
And I think
there.
it's important to note the damage assessment staff is trained using the county's damage assessment process. They have, the definitions are consistent, and every year we send people to this training. So while it's not absolutely scientific, it is consistent and thoroughly thought through. So it's not arbitrary. They're doing the best they can from
Sure.
the street. Once they've been identified, you do have to follow through with it. I do think, though, for citizens, if you're getting calls, and the same thing with our staff, I didn't have water, I know it might have looked bad, it's probably their best bet to call and go, get out here real quick, because you can take care of them fairly quickly.
Got it.
It doesn't, the ones that had no damage, when you go in there, you're not spending a lot of time in a house. You can check them off, as you said, if they didn't really have that much damage. You can get through them quicker. It's the ones where they're at the 48 to 50% right on the, I mean, some are really badly damaged, and some, it's only when you're close that you really end up in a challenge. If you, all you're doing is some drywall on these single-family houses, you're not getting them even close to 50% on the ones we looked at. So the
Yeah, and-
faster they can call for the inspection and get them checked off, the quicker.
And I was pleased. I'll just say that the one resident that I communicated with today, she called right away after I recommended. I said, just call community development. And she got scheduled right away. So that was nice to hear. Also, I know the letter we sent out, which I kind of think of as like a PSA, so to speak. Does FEMA have a PSA letter as well that explains?
FEMA pretty much has kind of like, these are the guideline
Form
letters that
letter.
you've got to use there for them, and that's kind of what we use then. So we
And are we including FEMA's letter?
that basically that we have there is pretty much FEMA's letter with
Right,
the
but
city of
that's
Port
a-
Orange.
FEMA doesn't send a letter. FEMA makes us
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. So I
It's-
guess what I'm getting at is
We use this FEMA standard letter format
right
to do
So
our
it's on our letterhead.
Right.
So you know what? To a lot of people who can't interpret this, they think this is
City
big
of
bad
Port
Port Orange overstepping their bounds.
Right.
And what I'm asking is there something from FEMA, their PSA, or something, a single letter that can accompany these letters or be given to these people to say, we are here because FEMA makes us be here to do this. This is why you're the community development director. You got that?
I got great staff that
Yeah.
give me stuff. That's
So
all, that's
I
all
would
that's
just
about.
I would just recommend as quick as possible
Yep.
when we do meet with those folks, if we can put that in their hand too, so they understand. Hey, okay, I got it. My city's following guidelines of the federal, and I know it explains that kind of in the letter.
It does in the lower part. In the top part, it's citing city,
Yeah.
city and state regulations
Yeah.
first.
I just think it
So
helps.
it is.
It
We
helps
do
people.
bring a lot of this information with us. Every day we go out there, we come back going, hey, we need to bring this out there. So the guys, are taking a lot of this information
got
out
you.
there to try
Perfect.
there. But it's getting to the point where we've got so much paper, it's not productive. So we're starting to kind of get the links to send out, emails and stuff like that. So we are trying to get as much information to them as possible.
And the
Well-
benefit of your conversation, I mean, I think every time we talk about it helps, because I've fielded a couple calls from residents, and I talked to one Friday night that I talked to Councilman Tremont about, that they're also concerned, are your inspectors out here with any kind of an agenda? Can I trust them? Are they going to try to
Right.
find? And so we were trying to talk them through, we're not, there is no agenda for our guys other than to follow what the law is that we have to follow.
That-
And the more they can hear that this is staff, and so I appreciate every time you can get one of them to us so we can help out.
And I appreciate those comments, Wayne, because that's exactly what I'm talking about. We've sent out 700 letters. If we can put other documentation in those folks' hands at some point as quick as possible, I think that moves us past the, why do we have to do this? Why is the city making us jump through this? Blah, 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 to more of a, okay, I get it. The federal government is mandating this be done. The city is following it. I'm going to get on board, help my city get through this process. I just, that helps a lot of the conversations, because we talk to them, then you talk to them, then Wayne's got to talk to them, and that's a lot going on when work can actually be getting done, and these folks can get their homes repaired.
We try to reach out. We've reached out to basically two property owners for the manufactured home communities then. So we've reached out to both of them, and we're trying to work with them to basically be as points of contact then, or the HOAs, because we know we can accomplish a lot more by talking to those points then. So
Thank you.
we're trying to get that communication. Unfortunately, a lot of the subdivisions that we have there don't have HOAs, so we don't have that ability to go in there then. But we're trying to find ways to spread the word, basically get that going with the subdivisions then.
And is Al Tischler's name on all the letters?
Yes, he
I
is.
love that. That's great.
Yeah, me too.
Did y'all draw straws on that?
What's that? No, we
No,
just
I
did
just
that and didn't
picked
tell him.
Perfect.
He went to lunch that day early, and
Yeah. Thanks, Tim.
Okay. Drew, you got anything?
No, I don't have anything further.
Okay. Chase? Reed? Nope. Wayne, anything else on this?
It's not specifically related to that, but I know one of the things is we've been tracking where the concern calls come in. The 50% rule from FEMA was one of them. The other one was that debris progress map that we had out there that had worked in past storms because it was focused on vegetative debris. We realized that was not a very good communication device to the public. So as of tomorrow night, we're supposed to have two different maps. One shows construction and demo debris, one shows vegetative. The vegetative map's already up now. Construction demo should be there tomorrow, but what we've done is pulled screen grabs. You can't zoom in and out on them, but we're at least showing the progress maps that are out there. and it went out on social and it's on our website. So we're at least trying to show that once people have started seeing, oh, there's a lot of dots on that map, there's a lot of progress, that has helped them a lot. I think with their entry into Sleepy Hollow yesterday, we've had trucks, I think, in at least all the neighborhoods that had the majority of the flooding. We haven't necessarily got everything up, but they've got trucks in there and started, so people are starting to see them. We're starting to get some calls from people who have only debris, or vegetative debris, but the answer has been consistent. They've been told to focus on getting into the areas with the heavy, big, bulky construction debris and get it out of these neighborhoods, and then they'll start hitting vegetative after that. So that provide that update. Like I said, anytime the more we can talk about it, the more it seems to help people understand.
What else on this?
That was it.
Okay. Any general questions on hurricane? Council, we got anything else for Wayne? Or have we all been doing a pretty good job of beating him up individually?
Yeah.
I know I have. We will certainly be talking about hurricane recovery for some time, and will probably be a topic at every council meeting for the foreseeable future, because people need to know where we're at, and they need to know that it's on our minds and it is important. And right now, it is job one with everybody in the city. We will most certainly be working this for quite some time. I would ask for those watching at home that absolutely, if you've got a question, it's important, it impacts your neighborhood, you can reach out to us. Understand that it may take a little while for us to get back to you, because we're getting a lot of calls right now, but be patient, we will get back to you. Everyone's important. We're very concerned about helping all our neighborhoods recover, no matter what, how hard they've been hit, or even the ones that have been not hit so hard. We want them all up and running. The entire city is important. And I appreciate the fact that a lot of people in the city have already asked me about charities that they can reach out to so that they can help other people in the city. You see things about people wanting to donate furniture, and other people saying, well, we're not quite ready for that, but because the houses aren't repaired yet. And that's okay. I know that there are people out there with big hearts and want to do a lot, and we'll all get through this together. And it starts with us up here. Any other business come before us this evening?
Just one quick comment on the debris thing for the city manager. We saw this in the last two storms, and I think it may already be starting to occur now. So there are folks going around with large pickup trucks and flatbed trailers willing to take somebody's debris for a small amount, so they don't have to wait on these trucks, which I'm fine with.
Okay.
But what we saw in the last few
choice.
storms, they then go out and dump all this debris behind our businesses, near our parks, and on roadways. We're already starting to see what I think is some indication of that on some roads. So I want to make sure that our community development staff, our fire department, our police department, our city public works folks that are out and about, are keeping an eye out for that kind of activity, because we cannot allow that. And for our residents, if they want to hire somebody to do that, I think that's great, that's fine. A lot of folks want to do that. They need to know that that debris has to go to the landfill. It is not acceptable and will not be
We do
tolerated.
not want to transfer a problem.
Yep, and that was a huge issue. In the last two storms, we saw that considerably happening, and it usually starts happening about 2-3 weeks, because I get it. Nobody wants all that debris sitting in front of their house, and after about that third or fourth week, when it's still there, they're like, you know what? This guy shows up, he says for $100 cash, he'll get rid of it all. And for some people, they've got that money and they want to do that, and that's fine. But then that truck or trailer just goes and dumps it out on somebody else's property. The area out there off of Martin's Dairy Road was a horrible problem for that. They were dumping it all over the place out there. So we just need to make sure that our city personnel that can help be watchful eyes for that kind of stuff are, and they know how to act and react to that type of thing if they see that, because I'm very confident that's starting to go on now.
Anything else? We'll do this one more time with Chase Tremont next week. We'll see you all then. Have a good night, everybody.